Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-federalists, they absolutely got it correct. This is Tom DeWeese, your host, and I'm here with another Tom this week, someone that we bumped into and got introduced together over 10 years ago. I think even longer. It was back in 2009, 2010. Is Tom DeWeese, and we first met back in Washington State at a symposium where Sam Adams was participating as one of the guys hosting it, and Tom was one of the featured speakers at that event. And that takes us all the way back to Tom's been involved since the 70s in fighting for liberty against the what was now termed Agenda 21 and that. And with that, Tom, why don't you go ahead and give us that deeper introduction, and then we'll jump into what we want to talk about today.
All right. Yeah. Well, I have been doing this for a long time,
Mhm.
but I about 30 years ago I created the American Policy Center, and we made the property rights is as I've fought all of this over the years. I found that property rights is the key to everything here. A lot of these things can't be imposed if they don't if they protect property rights. They can't impose a lot of these policies, and we're trying to get people to understand that. So that made that kind of the center of what I do, and working to help organize people all over the country to fight that. And I'm also now joined forces with a group called CFAC, the Committee for a Constructive Tomorrow, and they have made me their national grassroots coordinator to help me build those local organizations and fight back.
No, I appreciate that. And I think one of the areas that you sent me, I mean, there's so much that you have that impresses me all the time in the writings that you do, what you put up on the website, all of the different fights that are going on. And again, focusing right back to the whole area of property rights. What I wanted to cover with you was what you sent me in in the latest email of one of the articles you just wrote on DEI, and how that we're seeing different things, especially what we're seeing in some of the South American changes in leadership, as well as then what that's going to mean to us potentially, even a European, as I saw that at the end of it, what we have going on in trying to make these major changes globally, as well as then, it's going to be interesting, even though Trump won Iowa, boy, oh boy, that Nikki Haley, she's got the enemy, uh, you know, pouring money into her. So why don't you pick up a little bit on those effects of DEI that we've seen and what you're experiencing on some of the wins. Let's start there because we need to hear wins.
Absolutely true. And I had a conversation with a guy who published some of my articles, and he was saying, "Oh, Tom, we can't win." I see this all the time. People looking down in defeat, and there's no way we can stop them. And I said to him, there are a lot of victories taking place. We're just not reporting on it. And
Right.
we decided we needed to do that, and that was the result of that article that you're talking about. But what we have is a force in the world since the beginning of time. We
Yeah.
have always had a force that wanted to rule the world. And what they usually did was they brought in armies, and they attacked and they broke things and they killed people and they subjugated them. These guys are diabolical that we're
Yeah.
up against today. They have found a way to rule the world by getting us to surrender our liberties to them voluntarily. And what they came up with, and the bottom line to it is the whole climate change issue. Fear is the tactic, and the climate change became the weapon that they used. I've talked many times about environmentalists coming up to me saying it doesn't matter how many rights you think you have if you don't have a planet to stand on. There's the fear tactic, environmental
Right.
Armageddon. And so all these things are aimed at that. And they have left no stone unturned. They're looking at all of our energy sources. They're looking at our money supply. They're looking at investments on Wall Street. this ESG thing, which stands for environment, state, or I mean, excuse me, the word social equity,
Hmm.
environment, social equity, and government. That's everything in our life.
Hmm.
And so this is what they're using, and they now are getting companies to they will only invest in them if they have a good ESG rating.
Right.
And this is how they intend to control the the money supply and our whole entire market. And what gets me is that, I mean, Klaus Schwab said, Klaus Schwab, the head of the World Economic Forum, which came up with this great reset, he said that no industry or business will be spared from the impact of these challenges. Millions of companies risk disappearing, and many industries face an uncertain future. A few will thrive. And you look at this, and here are these corporations that are turning against their own product. The main one is the oil industry and the whole energy industry, and they are helping to destroy themselves so they get a higher ESG rating for investments.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah, I was
go
just
ahead.
going to, just add on that. What I brought up last week's program was that on what we're having here on a national registry now for small business, all businesses, which, is going to be used as a tool ultimately to drag us, even the smaller business, into that whole rating environment. And
Yeah.
you're spot on that. Why? I think that's the travesty. And, I always take it from a biblical sense, as the travesty is because they don't understand the sovereignty of God. So as a result, they're looking at the sovereignty of the state and man instead. And that's what you were inferring to, is that larger battle that's been here for a long period of time. But when just on a natural human basis, why does someone want to stab themselves in a heart, like we're talking about there on the businesses, to comply with the money can be generated? We can have alternative banking. We're seeing that even in some of the larger funds starting to come together. What have you been experiencing with those you've been running up against over all this time?
Why are they subjecting themselves to this and
Yeah,
allowing it to happen? It
yeah.
is a major puzzle. They all think they're going to be in with the big boys. And you have to understand what Klaus Schwab has done with the World Economic Forum. It's not just global leaders and that sort of thing. They are literally getting a hold of county commissioners and city councilmen, state legislators, bringing them in for training. And what you will hear when you try to talk to local elected officials, one of the things they're going to say to you is, well, everybody's doing it this way. This is just the way it's done now. That is part of that training and what they're looking at. And they're saying, here's the new way we're going to approach this. They create non-existent crises, and then they say, we've got a solution for this.
Mhm.
And that's what they run into. And I was lamenting the other day as I was dealing with some things. Every single time we try to talk with local officials, this is what we get. And I was thinking the other day, how is it possible that somebody is sophisticated enough to get involved and run for office and win, but they never, ever, ever look into the root of the programs that are being presented to them?
Yep.
And when we come along and talk about it, it's like, oh, that's just a conspiracy theory. And this is what we run into all the time. And it's because these guys are surrounded by these non-governmental organizations coming out of training of the World Economic Forum. And we as citizens aren't there. And so when one of us manages to crawl in and get that 3 minutes to address them as they sit on high, then these guys are whispering in their ear, the guy's nuts, don't pay attention to him. And that's, this is why, we are losing. However, we are winning something. One of the things that I've seen happen in the last few years, as I was speaking around the country for 30 years on Agenda 21 and trying to get people to understand the dangers of sustainable development and smart growth and all these programs, and I was, if people weren't affected by them, they weren't feeling it at the time, they weren't paying any attention to it. It wasn't a problem.
Right.
The people who were affected, there are very few in the beginning, were our fiercest warriors, to fight it. Now, everybody is feeling it now. We are seeing the entire economy begin to collapse around this. We are seeing the destruction of our farmland. We're seeing food supplies shortages and so forth. People are scared. What's happening to kids in the school system? Moms now are angry.
Yeah.
And so, this one of the things I believe is that these forces, these global forces, moved forward too quickly. They got arrogant and they started moving faster than they should because they hadn't totally indoctrinated everybody.
Right.
But what we're seeing now around the world are people beginning to rise up on this. I get reports every day from Europe on the the zero carbon thing that they're trying to shut down all these industries and stuff. Legislatures, even the European group there that runs everything, they are starting to turn against these programs. England, France, Germany, and so it's happening there. And then what happened just in the last couple of months in Argentina, a gentleman named Xavier Milei won he's a limited government free enterprise candidate. He was just elected president of Argentina.
Yep.
And this has sent some shockwaves through. He has said that he says we want to be the moral beacon of the continent. We want to be the defenders of freedom. And he calls these socialist leaders trash and human excrement.
Right.
And we'll no longer see Argentina foreign services working with dictators. This has sent a huge shockwave through the globalists there.
Oh, yeah.
And what I really like about him, Ronald Reagan used to, say that, the worst thing that, the worst sentence in history is, I'm from the government and I'm here to help you.
Right. Yeah.
And Milei has said the state is not the solution, the state is the problem. We got us a new Ronald Reagan in Argentina, it seems.
Yeah, definitely.
And one of the things he's done, they've got 19 federal agencies running out of the Argentine government. And he has said that he's going to get rid of 11 of those. And that includes the Ministry of Environment and Sustainable and Sustainable Development, and the Ministry of Women, Gender, and Diversity, and the Ministry of Education, and he calls the Ministry of Indoctrination.
Yeah.
This is a revolution going on there. Now, I've had some reports from people saying that Milei isn't really, as much as he says he is. If it's true, it may be true, or he may run into what Donald Trump ran into. Yep. Donald Trump was not an insider in Washington. And so, he put a lot of people in his administration at the advice of others, and it was a mistake. And that hurt him. And that could happen to Milei. But the bottom line here is that 55% of the people in Argentina voted for this. That means they want that message, that freedom that he was delivering, regardless of what he ends up being. Yeah. That is a revolution.
Yep, absolutely. So, yeah, we're down to the last minute. So just, to capitalize on everything that you're saying, those are the same, components that we saw under that first Trump administration. And as you're pointing out, that again, we're seeing everything is going to be going into high speed. We're already seeing that the deep state is verbally, not even secretively anymore, but proactively talking about how to overthrow Trump if he's elected. So we're seeing not only from the elections trying to be dampered from the beginning, but also the potentials of what the deep state wants to do. And just in these last few seconds is that we know that this is not anything new under the sun. Our founding fathers actually went through very much the same, and this is where a lot of people forget that history, So as we try and bring them, what's happening in the present to clearly understand that those truths, those battles can be won. To everything you said, Sam Adams clearly understood that. And we'll come back in the next segment with my friend Tom DeWeese. Thanks, Tom, and we'll see you soon. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the second segment of Samuel Adams Returns as we continue with my friend, colleague, and mentor in so many different ways, and looking at his website and all he's done over the years is Tom DeWeese. And we have been talking about some of the liberties that's happening in Argentina, paralleling with that in regards to what Ronald Reagan had even spoke. Also, the potentials of the roadblocks for Mealy down there being the outsider and deep state in government everywhere. But I think what we really keyed on, and the people in Argentina do understand this as well, is private property. And we know that that is our God-given right, is to have private property. That's what our founders even were fighting for us to have and maintain our private property. And so when we look at what's going on with taxation, as well as, those continued fights, Tom, what are you seeing from the NGOs? You brought that up in the first segment. I know we're really going to talk about a battle plan in the third segment, but these NGOs, they're getting tax dollars out the kazoo, and people aren't even necessarily aware of where that funding is coming from out of our pockets. Can you talk to that a little bit?
Absolutely. First of all, there are about 20,000 NGO organizations. Every single policy that we become aware of has at least one NGO behind it. Some of the leading ones on this are the Nature Conservancy and the Sierra Club and the Audubon Society and a whole bunch of those like that. And what you need to understand is happening in your local government. These NGOs work with the federal government. They actually help write grant programs that are specific to whatever their issue is. And they then come to your city councilman and they have, hey, got it all right here in a box for you and got the money for you too. We know exactly how to go and get that. Well, they help implement these programs. They're putting that money in their pocket as well.
Right.
But they get this is how they get your communities to put these programs in place. And as I said earlier, the World Economic Forum is one of the main sources in training these guys and giving them the foothold they need. And then they come in and just literally surround your elected officials. And I mean, I've talked to many communities, and they'll tell me there's 10, 15, 20 of these NGO groups that are operating in the background there. And that is all, in many cases, that is all your elected officials hear. And they do begin to believe, well, this is just the way it's done. Things have changed, and we need these programs to move forward. And smart growth and the whole sustainable development issue, and it's gotten into the education situation where our education curriculum is no longer about academics. It's all about behavior modification and getting you to have the right attitudes, values, and beliefs to follow through on this. And you see what's happening. These poor kids that are out there protesting everything that's going on today, they're victims of all this. And they don't know any better. When you're born, you're a blank slate, and it's what's put into you that you become. And that's what we're seeing there.
Yeah. So you're an Ohioan originally, and you've kept up on a lot of stuff that's going on in Ohio. And to your point, and I think we can focus that in respect to the regional governments, non-government entities in Northeast Ohio, or in Northern Ohio here, they have the NOACA, if you're familiar with that. That's the Northern Ohio, it's a regional board for transportation. But the fact of it is, and I think they have them all over the state of Ohio, they put together 3, 4, 5 counties. And in that, there's a board, county commissioners have a seat, then they have the unelected persons that are a part of that. And we see the larger leftist counties actually end up getting the most money. They get all of the primary positions. They get all the speaks. And what they're trying to do is transform the rural counties into what you're talking about, taking away property rights, pushing more of the urban activities out into the rural counties. And so trying to really change from a geopolitical perspective, using transportation as the cover story with the NGOs then coming in underneath. Can you describe a little bit more to that? Because I know
Yeah.
you've seen it in other places as well.
I'm glad you brought up the I'm glad you brought up the regional system, because this is the key to how they're putting this in place. You get these regional councils. Sometimes it can be up to 20 counties that are in there. And what they are focusing on is a one-size-fits-all policy. And they're the forces that are, going for these grant programs and so forth. And so what happens is you elect in your community, you elect your city council, your county commission, whatever the case is, and these regional councils come in and override them. And what they'll say to me is, well, we've got elected officials on the regional council. They weren't elected to that. They're not answering to the people on that. It's going on in the back rooms. And that's bogus. What we have to make city councilmen, county commissioners understand is they been involved in these regional councils and they have lost their power. They've got to understand that the people no longer have a voice, and they make us say, I'll tell you what, an example in Ohio, in Dayton, Ohio, about 10 years ago or so, lady by the name of Jenny Granado. Her family owned a historic old home. They had a front yard there with hedges and so forth. There was a highway outside of it. And her mother had a favorite tree she loved to sit under in the swing and so forth. And they knew they were going to widen the highway. And they never got any information of when or where or how much or whatever. But all of a sudden, one day they heard this racket outside, and bulldozers were going through their front yard, took down the hedge, took down the tree, and they put in a bike highway within 7 feet of their front door.
Oh,
and actually, Jenny's mother was so shocked by what happened there, she literally keeled over and died from this. But Jenny went to the county commission, and they said, well, we didn't have anything to do with that. That would be the regional council. He goes to the regional council, and they say, well, all we did was apply for the grants. No one was responsible. She was never reimbursed for the loss of her entire front yard. How can she live in a house with a bike highway? That's what, I mean, they call it a bike lane, but it's wide enough to be a highway of bicycles. The idea is eventually under smart growth, we're going to ride bicycles within 7 feet of her front door. If she opened up an ice cream stand there, maybe she would survive on it. But other than that, her property was destroyed and no one was responsible. This is the problem with it.
And see, that goes into, I think there's something in the Constitution and even in the state constitution of Ohio of taking property without proper reimbursement and so on. I mean, so we have what you're pointing out is these regional entities are total violators of anything that's sensible in property rights. And we end up with no recourse. And the attorneys don't help all that much. You can't find a good constitutional attorney. Well, we have a couple that I know. Actually, I know.
It's rare.
Yeah, I know about 4 of them real well. But it is very difficult then to get them to take on those types of cases, especially in property. They take on others, but property cases become extremely difficult. And it goes back to, again, what is happening in the taxation and where the tax monies are going and circling back on these NGOs and trying to educate. And we're really going to dive into it when we get into the third segment. But what else are you seeing on ESG? And I know DEI, we saw that very plainly with the United Airlines, that big article that came out. And are you still flying places, Tom?
I haven't since October, but I will be soon.
Are you flying United? That's going to be the real question.
That's what I usually fly is United
Oh,
too.
oh
But yeah,
boy, oh
so
boy. So, it's
yeah,
gonna get fun for you there.
it's
But
been an experience. I've had to. The seats have gotten smaller. It's just unbelievable the way they're operating.
yeah,
But
I haven't flown probably in 10 plus years, and it's different. So I don't know that
oh, yeah.
I'm
No, you're in
looking.
for an experience if you fly now. I'll tell
Yeah.
you. So I'll tell you the the only place I wore a mask through that whole pandemic was on airplanes because I had to do it to get somewhere I went. But I learned you didn't have to wear the mask if you were eating. I learned to chew really, really slow. You
There you go.
know?
Yeah, yeah. So what else would you like to touch on in respect to the ESG component in relationship to we covered education, we covered business, we covered but in government, it's like they don't even have to worry about it. They just jump right on that bandwagon. Whereas business
Yeah,
is being pushed by the financial institutions and those that have taken in from an investor perspective.
yeah. Well, these huge corporations, and BlackRock is one of the biggest, most powerful in investing in all this stuff. Bill Gates is another that's investing so much money in all this stuff, putting it in place. But what you're finding is local businesses are having a very difficult time existing, even getting something started now with the rules, the regulations that you've got to follow, and small businesses can't do that. Small business is the root of a free enterprise system. And these corporations are not free enterprise. They are becoming government entities. We've talked for a long time about public-private partnerships
Yeah,
and what that is. Well, this is what we're seeing. And you cannot have a partnership between government and enterprise. Because what you ended up finding was those corporations that went along with the government, what they're doing, were able to use their power with the government to get legislation passed to put their competition out of business.
right.
And these are ruthless people that are doing these things, and we're seeing the end result of it. And again, as I said in the beginning, watching them just try to destroy their own industries, you wonder why. One of the things we find with this is that under ESG, why don't they, when we have a business, you sell products that the people want, but all of a sudden you're not. That's because the consumer no longer matters.
Right.
They will now tell you what you will buy by putting what that is acceptable on the market, and that is it. And so a consumer trying to, and maybe somebody coming up with a new idea. Well, can't do that because that doesn't fit. And so, new innovation, new ideas, science suffers from it, on and on and on, because you're not allowed to do anything but what they tell you, and they're telling you what you will buy, and giving you what's there, and how you, and it goes down to how you'll think as well.
That that
That's
comes
ESG.
that comes down to that original definitions back from the 50s and 60s of fascism. When you have
Mhm.
government and business that are collaborating to such an extent, that's when you have that fascist society. And it's funny how that term has gotten all mixed up in modern language. And
Well, what you have is
yeah.
the rules for radicals. Saul Alinsky. Rule
Mhm.
number one is blame your opponent for what you do,
Right,
and so these fascists are calling us fascists and Nazis and everything else. And
right.
all we're trying to do is have a free society where people have a choice.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, just to in this last minute, in that regard as well, I have a friend that I introduced you to, George Brennan, and he's been doing a lot of work at the high level corporate level at the boardrooms and that. And what he's finding is trying to get them to understand and recognize once again that it needs to be products driven by the consumer, not to what we're seeing within that ESG. And he's getting such a battle and the same experiences that you're having as you're reaching out and meeting all these different folks. So, just in the last, give me 30 seconds on what is Well, let me take it into the third segment because I just chewed up 30 seconds. But once again, just kind of wrapping it back into historical perspective, we saw that fighting battles of industry and having the control of them was another paramount uh, battle point, fighting point, war point for the founding fathers when we saw that the industry in the colonies was being destroyed. And Sam Adams and the others said, oh, no, no more. We're going for our liberties. We'll see you in the next segment. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to this third segment of Samuel Adams Returns. This is Tom DeWeese with my guest, Tom DeWeese, and we're going to solve problems now. You know, we talk about a lot of things, and, Tom and I on the segment break here, we decided that we're going to come up with solutions. And one of the solutions that Tom has been working on for, I'll let him explain how long, but I think it is really driving to a place of really pulling things together smartly. A lot of folks out there have been trying to pull things together, but I think that the freedom pods is something that drives what Sam Adams' passion was: local, getting local. We see a lot of different efforts now being made local. Here in Ohio, we even have Mark Pukita, who ran for U.S. Senate. He's doing some things to drive, especially with the state, what do you call them? The GOP state squirrels is what I usually call them, because that's what they act like when the Republican Party leadership. But I don't want to go down that path too much because it gets my blood going. But I want Tom to come up and talk about the solutions that you've been working with for how long, Tom? How long have you been doing the Freedom Pods now?
Well, we've been doing that for a couple of years, but I've been advocating fighting on the local level for a long time.
You have.
Uh, a lot of people, one of the problems we have, from our side, we get all excited about presidential campaigns. We'll get out there and we'll knock on doors and we'll pass out literature and so forth for our guy. But that's it. Going to a city council meeting, I've got a family to raise. I've got a job to work. I can't be there. I can't do that. It gives me a headache. And the other side, as I described in the earlier segment, these NGOs, these non-governmental organizations, are there all the time, and we're not. And so, your elected officials shut you out. That you're not part of the process, and that's what we have to change. And so that's when a couple of years ago, I came up with the term Freedom Pod. And the idea is that you're organizing in your community. People get overwhelmed when they think about it. First of all, trying to do this from a national level, going after Congress first. I mean, how much influence do you have on them? But in your local community, our founders set up our system so that you would have the most impact on the local community. Well, guess what? That's what the NGOs are doing in the local. That's how we're putting this stuff together. And but people get overwhelmed by all of that. And it's interesting. In talking with some people as I've been working on putting this together. For example, I had a conference call with about 8 activists in Idaho, in a community in Idaho, and they wanted to do something. And I said, well, what's the most important issue there in your community? 8 people, I got 8 different answers.
Yep.
And well, what are we going to focus on? How do we move forward? You cannot save the republic in one day. You have got to fight and win small battles. I've had people say to me, we had 100 people show up at city council. And I said, what happened? Well, nothing. They didn't pay any attention to us. And I said, what did you do the next day? Well, nothing. It didn't work. I said, yep. They were sitting there looking at their watches. They knew you were going to do this. This is what we do. If you had 100 people show up at city council, that is a victory. Look at it that way. Yep. Even if you lose the overall battle at the beginning, you've got to start and build on that. And so this is where I came up with the idea of Freedom Pods focused in your community. Don't worry about next door, your community. If you begin to win victories in your community, the other communities are going to say, how'd you do that? And that is happening. I have this is an example down in Louisiana. I have an organization down there I've been working with for several years called the Caddo Alliance for Freedom. It's around Caddo Lake down there. And some local activists, they weren't even activists, they were just residents, 5 guys who were not politically involved, saw that Shreveport City Council was beginning to extend its influence over their township illegally. And they went to a city councilman and they tried to talk to him about this. And he said, well, you're nice fellows, but you're not going to change anything here. This is just the way it's done. And
Wow.
Chris Crackman, the gentleman who kind of was the leader of this group, said in his mind, that's when everything shifted. And they began to do it all right. And they did a whole bunch of things. I won't go into all the details of what they did, but they were passing out literature door to door and so forth. They got 100 people starting to attend city council meetings, and they presented correctly. And later he told me that city council came up and said, what can I do for you fellas?
Right.
You've got to be there. You've got to feel, they've got to feel you there. And, I'm so glad that the name of your program is Sam Adams Returns, because he is my very favorite founding father. And he's the one who said, it does not take a majority to prevail. You don't have to have, thousands of people. You can do this with 15 or 20. He said, but rather an irate, tireless minority keen on setting brush fires of freedom in the minds of men.
Right.
And that is the root of what I came up with for Freedom Pods. And let me just go through just a very basic thing. First of all, as I said, you're not, we're not there. Don't you wish, after what happened in the last 3 elections now, don't you wish that we had people who cared about being involved in the Board of Elections?
Yes.
Don't you wish we cared about who was the city attorney? We haven't paid attention to any of these things. The other side, no position is too small. Every one of them has some ability to influence. I ran into in Iowa, we're trying to stop this idiotic carbon capture pipeline, which is the dumbest thing I've ever run up against, and that's saying something. And I had county commissioners all over the state of Iowa who were opposed to it, but they kept saying, well, we don't like it, but the Iowa Utilities Commission, they're behind this, and there's nothing we can do. And I went across the state. I barnstormed Iowa, and I went to county supervisors and I said, you were elected by the people to protect their rights. The Iowa Utilities Board isn't elected by anybody. You're their boss. Politicians created the Iowa Utilities Board. It began to have an effect. I called them cowards. Yeah. And it began to have an effect, and they're beginning, we're winning some victories there. Well, here is, to get a Freedom Pod started, get 5 or 10 people that are interested in doing things. And begin, first of all, I ask in my audiences when I speak, how many enjoy doing research? There's some people who just want to just tear in and just follow it all the way. I tell them, a few hands come up and I say, you guys are the most important people in the room at the moment. You cannot fight unless you know your enemy. Who are you up against? What are you up against? Every community has a comprehensive plan. This tells you where they are headed. Look in there and find who's behind it, who has been pushing it, what kind of grants have they taken. Look into, you can probably tell who the NGOs are that work there. These are all weapons for you to use in fighting it. Those NGOs all have a record. You can see what they have done in other communities and what they've been behind. That's a weapon. The other thing then, that 3 or 4 people who volunteer to go to every single public meeting don't have to say anything, just listen. We call them the watchers. All they have to do is listen and take notes and so forth of what's going on. You will begin to find out which members of your council are the ones pushing these things, because you'll hear them talking about it. Who are the NGOs that they're reverting to and so forth. And the third one, what we call the agitators. And that's a little more aggressive than I really want it to be, because these are the people, 4 or 5, who will get up and speak at these public meetings based on what the researchers and the watchers have found. But you want to do this in a way that it's very credible. For example, in my Shreveport or my Caddo Alliance for Freedom people at Shreveport, they did it brilliantly, how they present in front of the council. They don't yell and scream at them. They don't accuse. The worst thing you can do, even though I will spend a lot of time in my talks talking about Agenda 21 and the roots of all that, do not rush in there. You get those 3 minutes to speak to them while they're on the high looking down at you and say, you're implementing UN Agenda 21. If there's a trap door under where you're standing, you're gone.
Yeah.
They're not going to listen to that at all.
Right.
But if you go in and focus on why are you opposed to these particular policies on a local level? Why? And explain to them why this is going to affect your property rights or something in your neighborhood or your business or whatever the case may be. Explain it to them. And one of the things that I saw they did in Caddo, where they used that whole line about, well, this is just the way it is.
Right.
And they explained to them in great detail, no, you were elected for this purpose. You know,
you got about 4 minutes, Tom. So just to help you there. Yeah.
Take a look at the victims, the people who are affected by these programs. Go down there and knock on doors. Do you know what they're about to do to you? You can recruit new people that way. Get a media team together. The media, everybody always rolls their eyes and says, oh, come on, the media is all left wing. But if you don't talk to the media, then they're never going to report on your side. You never know what you're going to end up getting. I have other people who are now starting their own newspapers, and there's a way to do that. And the people who aren't used to doing all this kind of stuff, you can get them filling seats in city council. You can get them holding signs and things. Social media programs, set up a Facebook page, get your information out that way. Several other things you can do. I have written some articles. You go to my website at americanpolicy.org, and there you can click on, there's a section there that says freedom pods on it. We're getting ready to build a whole bunch of new stuff in there, new tactics and stuff. But I have an article there. It says, what is a freedom pod? And you can read through there and get ideas, and you can sign up and say you want to be involved, and we'll get with you.
Yeah, and you have a great interactive map there as well that indicates who the leaders are in the various states that have a lot of activity going on. So we'll have all the links both in the newsletter, Tom, as well as I'll try and plug some things in as we're doing here in the video. I don't have that active ability to do it, but it'll get in there. Make sure folks are able to find what you're doing. With that, and with what your interactions, you and I talked about folks. We've seen so much, as you mentioned, when you asked 8 people, what's the top issue? And you had 8 different answers. On top of that, I'm going to just lay it out, and we only have a couple minutes. Folks, we got to get over our egos. You know, I call it the thumb and the suspenders thing that, you get out there with. Tom, can you give us some ideas on how we can get over that as leaders, as individuals participating for our liberties? 2 minutes, please.
Well, how do we get them people motivated and go in the right direction and so forth? It's hard. I mean, you have to really have a conversation about what is it you're really facing here. But one of the things, look at what they're talking about. What are they promoting in your local governments? And number one is stop being polite. And once they are putting policies in place that are destroying your industry, your property rights, whatever, they have taken away the shield of being polite themselves, and begin to ask questions. And that's one of the things that we're working on, is asking specific questions. What's behind this? Who are the people involved in this one? I'm working on all this. It's hard to get that part started, but if you can just focus on look at what's happening right now on something and start with that, and look at a little victory. You can't win the whole thing overnight. Look at just the fact you're there is a victory. Keep building on that, but don't go home. Be there every single meeting.
Right. And as you know, historically, that was something that I always talk about, in relationship to the northern colonies in particular. Every citizen was required to participate in a citizens meeting, even the local idiot. And so that means they had some level of intelligence about them. So that's what we saw. We saw that grant participation, and unfortunately, we don't require that any longer of our citizens, even down into that township level, which is a travesty. And, so Tom, I really want to thank you for coming on. We're down to our last 30 seconds. You truly, go ahead, your website again.
It's americanpolicy.org. Yeah.
And I'll tell you what, folks, there's a lot of information there. Sign up for the newsletter, donate, support the activity, the great work that Tom's doing. And ladies and gentlemen, it always goes back to what are you willing to do for your freedom, and get those brush fires in our minds lit. And we'll see you next week. Thanks a lot, Tom. See you later.
My pleasure. Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.